there's much to cover. I'm Sandy Billy with the Center for Sacred Music, and this concludes our series for the year, which was on this theme of this scripture passage from Micah, with what shall I come before the Lord? And we have explored throughout the year how musicians and theologians and politicians have interpreted this, sometimes ignoring what came after as a response, but making it their own. And we conclude today with Reverend Marianne Schoettly, who's visiting us from New Jersey, and we'll share how she answered that question in her own life. I was telling her that one of my areas of interest is how the church that claims itself to be most contemporary in modern times limits its leadership of women in the evangelical, non-affiliated with the denomination churches. Many in this community, you do not see women as preachers or as leaders. You do not see them leading worship. You do not see them leading music. They can sing, they can play the piano, but they are not allowed to actually serve as leaders. And then I thought, well, before I start criticizing them, I really don't know when the Methodist Church began to do that. So I looked back, old school PowerPoint. John Wesley was born in 1703 and ordained in 1726, probably a pretty smooth transition. But in 1761, it shocked me to know that he granted preaching licenses to women. Sarah Crosby was the first, and he allowed to preach. And he continued that, and when he died in 1791, there were hundreds of ordained and approved women Methodist preachers, or preaching in that tradition. After he died, the various conferences of the church now known as Methodist revoked and refused any ordination of women. And so that ended all that he had done, and they cited 1 Corinthians 14, 34, and 35. I have my most favorite Good News for Modern Man Bible, which Dr. Wansink would say was like reading a map at the Texaco station. It's so accurate. But basically it says that in church women should keep silent. And so they use this as their reason. Who knows how they claim that, what was wrong with John all these years, that he didn't read that verse. It continues this way until 1940, and some Methodist conferences in the United States begin to allow women to be ordained as clergy, but that they do not give them appointments. If you're in the Methodist church, you only get a church when the conference appoints you to that church. So you can be one, but you can't do it anywhere. That's basically what they're saying. Some conferences began, like one in Wisconsin, one in Michigan, and then in Louisiana, there's this great case of a woman named, just in case you need to know someday, I won't find her name, Lee Joyner. They would not give her an appointment, but they gave her $5,000 and a vacant lot, which was really pretty good, in the 1940s. So she began her own church, and at her death at 52, it wore her out quick, the church had over 2,200 members. So she was doing something relatively well. In 1956, all Methodist conferences were now ordaining women, and by the time the church joined with the United Brethren to become the United Methodist Church, 1968, women as clergy was a done deal. If you are in a church that follows the lectionary, you notice that, or you may recall the last couple of weeks we've seen the Samaritan woman at the well, and at the end of that story she goes and tells other people about Christ and brings them back. So some consider her the first evangelist. And then last week's, for this coming week, it's Lazarus. And Mary and Martha are also credited with bringing people to the Lord. At the very end of that story, which we often cut off, it says because of the Jews coming to visit Mary and Martha and their interaction with them, many are brought to believe in Christ. So we see a great cycle. Even here with poor John Wesley, he thought he was doing what was right, and then it all ends. And we really look forward to hearing today your story of a very long struggle and how it has worked out in your life. There are two terms that I think we're going to want to know more about. this women priests as one word, and apostolic succession. So would you join me in welcoming Reverend Shaw?
Thank you very much, and it's so good to see you. And I hope to talk for maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then entertain any questions that you have, because that's why you're here. You probably have some questions. So maybe I'll answer some as I talk, but if I don't, please do ask them. And I don't find any, don't apologize. People apologize. I'm sorry to ask this. I don't take offense at questions. So the question that I was presented with was, with what shall I come before the Lord? And then there was a little addendum, how the answer changes. And interestingly enough, that was one of the questions that I asked myself at the beginning of the path when I became a candidate to be ordained. And the answer that I came up with was that really, truly, I only have the gifts that the God that I am offering my gifts to gave me. So I come with nothing that hasn't been received from the divine creator. I come then with empty hands. So that's my answer. I come with empty hands, and empty hands are open hands. And what I mean by that is that I give myself over to whatever I feel the Spirit is drawing me to. The Spirit of wisdom. And the Spirit of wisdom, you probably know, in the Hebrew Testament, is named Sophia. So the community that I pastor is Sophia, inclusive Catholic community. And they chose that name. And they chose that name because they wanted a balance. We hear so frequently in our churches references always to male gods, or a male god. He's and hymns abound. So we wanted a balance. And inclusive for us means that we not only welcome everyone to the table, we welcome everyone to the table, but we also use inclusive language for God. And that does not mean we call God she. That's not inclusive. We call God God, or the divine, or the creator. There are multiple names for God. The Muslims have prayer beads. They have 33 prayer beads, and they go around 3 times, and they have each of those prayer beads a separate name for God. And they don't have 100, because what they want to do is indicate that there is no limit for what we can call God. Unfortunately, in many of our churches, we cannot call God sheep. We can call God a rock. So, empty hands, waiting to be filled with what the Spirit will bring me. So I trust that that wisdom of God will lead my heart and my mind. And if I pay attention, if I'm awake and aware. So understandings about how we come before our God have changed throughout history and continue to change. They've changed in the world, and the evidence for that is that we have so many religious traditions in our world. So the whole world changes all the time. That's pretty obvious. The churches change, and since the religions change, they change because there's new information, there are new ways of interpreting, and there are those who will understand and embrace the new understandings, and there are those who, for whatever reason, do not move along those paths, so there are divisions. And then we build great big walls and say, oh, well, you're bad and I'm good, I've got the truth. I've heard that for a long time in my church, that we have the fullness of truth. I always wondered how come I was so lucky to be born into this church. So also understanding is how we come before God change throughout our own lives. And the changes are based on our experiences of affirmation. Sometimes our experiences of denial. And sometimes our experiences of mystery. We don't have answers. First, all of us, the world, the religions, and people, first we come following laws. Like Moses. And the laws of Moses were good laws. And most laws are meant for good. But then we live the laws, and we experience the laws, and we start to question the laws. And the laws are good, but the laws are not enough. We don't come to know God through the laws. We come to know God through living, through experiencing the laws, and then through reflection on the experiences that we've had. And we discern, and we start to listen to the prophets, old and new. And we learn that laws are guides, and they don't come in a one-size-fits-all variety. So we start to ask how and when and for how long shall we follow particular laws. And what we start to become and what we start to listen to are the prophets. The prophets became aware of what was going on in given situations, and they started to challenge the people to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And guess what? That's what Jesus did. And then we cry out, as the prophets did, to bring people back to the spirit of the laws. And we all know that the prophets, and I include Jesus in that, the prophets got beaten and tortured and banished or just killed outright. That's what happens when one speaks truth to power. Power finds a way to kill. So we women in the Roman Catholic woman priest movement aren't asking permission anymore to do what our consciences tell us needs to be done. We've become our own prophets. And I don't say that with any hint of exaltation, of self-serving attitudes, but truly that is what we've had to do. So we've taken back our rightful, God-given place, ministering to Catholics and others as welcoming priests, leading inclusive communities. This is an international movement. Our mission specifically is to prepare to ordain in apostolic succession, and I'll talk to you about that in a little while, and to support primarily, but not only, women who are called by the Holy Spirit and by their communities to a renewed priestly ministry. We find that it's rooted in justice and faithfulness to the gospel. We've challenged and broken the church's canon law 1024. It's an unjust law. It discriminates against women. And because we've broken the law, our ordinations are illegal or illicit. But despite what some of our bishops say, our ordinations are not invalid. We have valid ordinations because we have followed the prescription of the Catholic Church for ordination. And I'll go into here a little bit about apostolic succession. The teaching of the Church is that through the laying on of hands, ordination has come down through the generations right from Peter. That's not accurate. We have no record of Peter laying hands on anybody. We have no real record of who, and Peter isn't the first pope. What is the first bishop of Rome? And Pope Francis calls himself the Bishop of Rome. He doesn't call himself the Pontiff of the Universal Church. He has not used that term. He's the Bishop of Rome. So anyway, we have apostolic succession because our first priests who were ordained bishops were ordained bishops by the laying on of hands of 3 male bishops who are and were and who still are in full communion with the Catholic Church. Their names are not known. They are under lock and key. They will not be made known until after all 3 have died, because they would lose their position. They'd be excommunicated just like we are. So to protect them, I don't even know their names. Our 5 bishops here in the United States did meet with one of those bishops a couple of years ago, and they refer to him as Bishop X, out of respect and out of necessity. So it's a requirement in our church that if you are going to be called a priest, if you are going to be ordained a priest, you must do this with the laying on of hands. So we go back to those 3 bishops who were ordained by other bishops in full communion with the church, who were ordained by other bishops in communion with the church. And bishops can trace their lineage, as it were. Well, so can we, the same way the men can. So that's, and if you have more questions about apostolic succession, I can answer them later, but apostolic succession, number 1, is actually not completely accurate, because we don't have that complete record. And what we really need to be following is apostolic tradition. We have to go back to the early church. And interestingly enough, we do. So the Catholic people are accepting us as their priests, and they continue to support us. And our ordinations go back, our priestly ordinations go back to 2002, when 7 women were ordained on the Danube River. And a year later, in 2003, these 3 male bishops ordained 2 of those women to be bishops. And the reason they did that was because they wanted to step back. They said, listen, Rome is going to catch up with us if we keep doing this. We need to ordain you bishops so that you can continue this tradition. It's not that they didn't want it, that they didn't want to do it. It was that they needed to protect the people that they serve. Because if they get excommunicated, then what happens to their people? So we're here to stay. We're in 30 states right now across the country. There are approximately 180 of us worldwide. That would include priests, deacons, and candidates. And it's growing very, very quickly, exponentially. We are ordaining 2 priests in May in our region, in the Eastern region, and 8 deacons next October. So it's really a growing movement in our church. And I would say this, the Catholic people are speaking loud and clear. The polls show somewhere between 68 and 75% of Catholics who would accept and do support the idea of women priests. And there's a term, another Latin term, well, I don't have to put it up there. It's called the sense of the people, the sensus fidelium. What do the people say? Not what does the Pope say, not what do the bishops say, but what's coming out of the sense of the people. And what's coming out of the sense of the people is that it's time for women priests. So the people are speaking, and we have an obligation, according to the documents of Vatican II. The laity, the people of God, have not only a right, but a duty to speak their minds to the bishops. And people are speaking. Doesn't mean we're good. We keep speaking. So I could give you the whole history from 2000 to today of ordinations and things like that, but I don't think that's necessarily what you want. You can read that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my history. And again, not for self-aggrandizement, but for education. I was saying to somebody, I think this morning, my story could have been put together by taking bits and pieces of other women priests' stories and leaving them together. Most of what I have experienced is not unique. Most of it finds a common thread among most of the women in the movement. So it's, in that sense, not a unique story. I wanted to be a priest. I told my mother I wanted to be a priest before my first communion, and first communion happens when you're 7. I used to play priest, and so many of our women say that. Or people come to me, I have a reason to do this, and they say, I played priest when I was little, and I say to them, so did we. And I tried to find them and bring them, and I couldn't find them. I went into Walmart the other day looking for Necco wafers. You know what Necco wafers are? That's what we used. We picked out the white ones. So we all knew what Necco wafers tasted like before we knew what really communion tasted like. Necco wafers taste better. However, certainly the communion bread and the communion wafers have a depth of meaning that nothing else has. So, told my mom about that, and she told me, well, honey, women can't be priests. And I accepted that as a little kid. Little kids accept what their parents tell. We follow rules when we're young. And that was the rule, and that was just the way it was. And it was okay. It never left me, though. I went to Catholic schools, grade 6 through college, right straight through college. I went to all Catholic schools. I always questioned, but I put the dream of priesthood away. But it was always under the surface. I raised my family Catholic. We did all the things Catholics are supposed to do. I took as a career biology. I took biology for 35 years or so, and loved it. But I want to tell you, teaching biology, I think almost teaching any science, maybe anything, brings you so much closer to God. Because you're just overwhelmed by the complexity and the beauty and the inspiration of creation. So there were so many connections to my faith, to my religion, to the God of my understanding. So I never left. Raised my children Catholic. And one of them, my son's, it has his children in CCD. Well, he did. Now they come to me. They call it Grandma's Religious Education. I was delighted that they did that, because in our church, and most churches these days, I believe, we are teaching primarily, and I didn't mean to go off on this, but I will for a second, we are teaching mostly atonement theology. And there are so many other theologies and so many other ways of understanding God, other than a God that would send his son to be slaughtered. So we really, throughout our CWP, have rejected atonement theology in favor of creation theology, liberation theology, feminist theology, all of the various ways of looking at our God. And these others all look at our God as a loving God. How do you look at God as a loving God when he would subject his child to child abuse? So we really do not preach in any way, shape, or form that Jesus came to die for us. That's a whole other topic. But it is not what we teach. So my questions were, what I said before, how did I just happen to be born into the right religion? Why can't women be priests? Why not meat on Friday? I like lobster. That's no sacrifice for me. That's fine. Why can't priests marry? Peter had a wife. Priests married up until probably the 1100s. And why did they have to write so many rules about women not being priests? They don't write rules about things that aren't happening. So there were women priests. And they were accepted. So I had a lot of questions, both religious questions and questions about, did you ever wonder where Jesus got his Y chromosome? I'm a biology teacher. Did you ever wonder who Cain married? So we need to get away from all of, in my opinion, away from all the literalism. Would I really go to hell if I missed Mass on Sunday? What kind of God is that? So only some of those questions have adequate answers within the church structure. So I became a seeker of answers. And I found Call to Action, which is a reform movement in our church, which is originally established by our bishops after Vatican II to put into place the documents of Vatican II to see that they are played out. After people started to take up and offer their voice and their opinions, many of the bishops dropped out and they started to condemn that movement, call to action. But it's still going. They have a conference every year. I found them. I went there. I go there every year. It's my shot in the arm. The second thing that I found was the National Catholic Reporter. Very, very unlike parish or diocesan newspapers. My own particular diocesan newspaper has a picture of our bishop on at least 50% of the pages. So it's really not, I don't see it as a diocesan newspaper. I see it as a reflection of our bishop and, what he's doing in the diocese. And most of it is, he's confirming and he's going back to celebrations. And I know there's a lot of work to do, but I'm not hearing what I need to hear there. So the National Catholic Reporter really is one of my go-to resources. I became very focused on my religion while I was overseas. And in 1998, I began working on a master's degree simply because I wanted, it was a third master's degree. I wanted it. I never thought I'd go back to school once I got my undergraduate degree, and here I was. But I went back because I just wanted to know more about religion, which I was depending on to help me to make my connections with the divine. And in many ways, it did a very good job. But in the course of my studies, one of the courses that I took was called Christian Views of the Body. And I took that opportunity to write a paper that I titled A Woman's Body, Impediment to Priesthood, because there are impediments to priesthood. Well, they don't list that one, but it is. So I looked in that paper, I looked at all the reasons that the church has given, and some of them in the documents written by Pope John Paul II, about why women can't be ordained. None of them hold up. I'm just going to go through them very briefly. Jesus didn't ordain women. You hear that quote. Jesus never ordained women. Well, Jesus never ordained anybody. Jesus lived a Jew, died a Jew, and all of his followers were Jews. So Jesus did not, Jewish men didn't go around ordaining. Nobody ordained anybody in the Jewish tradition. Rabbis came from the Levite class. They just were what they were. They didn't have to be ordained. This is the most offensive. Women cannot image Jesus, who is the bridegroom of the church. Isn't that taking literalism a little too far? But they tell us we cannot act Latin in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, at the altar. I cannot image Jesus. I cannot image the Christ at the altar. That makes me way less than a man. Talk about oppression of women. Is our call, not all of us, to live as Jesus lived? To be as Jesus was? To treat others as Jesus did? Is that not what we're supposed to do? Image Jesus? If I'm supposed to image Jesus, why can't I do that at the altar? Am I that deficient? Think about what I don't have. Jesus only called men to be disciples. Well, we clearly are ignoring Mary Magdalene, and in the scriptures it says, the women of Jerusalem who followed Jesus and supported him out of their own means. Where'd they go? What happened to them? And then they say, well, it's the constant apostolic tradition that only males are ordained. We don't have any record of the apostles ordaining anybody either. But we do have a record of Paul referencing Phoebe as a deacon and referencing Junia as an apostle. And about us not being able to say that we are called, Paul said he was called. He appointed himself an apostle. He said, I, Paul, the apostle. So if he could decide that he was an apostle, why? What's wrong with us? So like I said, nothing holds up. They will also say, even Mary wasn't a priest. It's better to be a priest than to give birth to Jesus? Really? And who was the first human being who could say legitimately, this is my body, this is my blood? And today, in our church, no woman is allowed to say those words. Only men can say them. So, I knew that the non-ordination of women was wrong. I never thought I could be ordained, but at least I had that settled in my mind. Then, in 2002, I became aware of the women who were ordained on the Danube River in January, and who got instant letters of excommunication. Instant! There's a priest who celebrated Mass with one of our priests 2 years ago, and he has been dismissed in the last couple of weeks. He's been dismissed from the priesthood. They work with alarming speed to excommunicate anyone who is speaking for gender equality in our church. And unfortunately, who has been, and I'm not suggesting that they should be excommunicated, by the way, who has been excommunicated or defrocked or silenced because of pedophilia in our church? So in 2003, I completed my degree in theology. I didn't think, by the way, that I could be ordained. This had happened in Germany. I didn't want to be excommunicated. I was still there in my mind. Many things happened in that year. I also retired from high school teaching, started college teaching. I started to teach theology in the college that I had gotten my degree, taught biology in another college. I started to do RCIA work. That's the Rite of Roman Catholic. Now I'm going to lose it. But anyway, it's the program for people who are coming into the church, the Rite of Christian Initiation of adults. It's the program that people go through if they would like to, come into the Catholic Church. It's you should know what you're joining. So I was the director of that program. I did retreat work at a retreat house that was sponsored by a religious congregation. I became a grandmother, so I had that work to do too. So things were good. And then in 2005, at one of the CTA conferences, I experienced a woman who had been excommunicated, but who had been ordained in apostolic succession in the old Catholic Church. And she celebrated Mass. And I was overwhelmed seeing that woman at the altar. It just blew me away. But I still didn't think I could do it. The next year, I went back to CTA, and the Roman Catholic women priests were having liturgy. And I said, well, let me go find out more about this. Again, I wept for the whole first half of the Mass. I could not get myself together just to see women at the altar. And Patricia Friesen, who was the first bishop who ordained women here in the United States, she's got an amazing story. 45 years a Dominican nun, was ordained in 2003, and was instantly put out of her order. But anyway, I heard her speak, and I realized that not only was this possible, but that I absolutely needed to look into it. So I did. And I almost never looked, I didn't look back. I asked if I could be a candidate, and what that meant was that I needed a psych exam. I needed a degree in theology, which I just happened to have. I needed a background check, I needed references, and I needed to go through 10 units of work, and those are units that are very reflective. It's not academic work, it's reflective. What are you doing when you baptize somebody? What's happening? What's the underlying, okay, you're pouring water and you're saying words, but what's the spiritual dimension? What is Eucharist? That's a great question. Is it a reward for being good? Or is it food for the journey? because in answering that question, you answer the question, to whom shall I give communion? Our church, and the image that it's given, says it's a reward. It is not saying it's food for the journey. That's very sad. So I needed to go through these units of work, and they are supposed to be a time of discernment. So I really went into that thinking, all right, I've always wanted to be a priest, but I never had to discern whether that was a true call. I mean, kids want to be lots of things when they're little. So was this real? So I really did take that seriously. I went and I got myself a psychologist. I said, look, I want to come once a month. I would like you to have an ear. Am I doing this for the right reasons? Purity of purpose and clarity of purpose. Do I know what I'm doing? Because my life is going to change. I also got myself a new spiritual director. I figured I needed kind of new eyes and new ears. And after about 3 units of work, somebody who I respected highly said, listen, if you stay on this path, I'd like to come to your ordination. I said, I don't think I'm going to get off this path. She said, oh good, well tell us when it is and everything. And I was riding, I was on my way home, and I thought, what did you just say? And I realized that my discernment had brought me to a yes. A yes, this is real. So I continued and was ordained deacon in Philadelphia in 2008. No, 7. And there was an enormous reaction. Here's why. Talk about perfect storm. The year prior to this ordination, there had been an ordination in St. Louis, and the then Cardinal Burke, who was there, excommunicated everybody in sight. First, anybody who ordained the 2 women. The 2 women themselves, they got letters, and he put under interdict a woman religious who had been I think she was a director of religious education. I don't know what her title was in that diocese. Put her under interdict. That means she couldn't receive any of the sacraments within that diocese. So he went crazy, and it got all kinds of publicity. Then what happened, strangely enough, on the feast of Joan of Arc, there's an article in Observatorio Romano, which is the Vatican newspaper, that said any women who sought ordination and anyone who ordained a woman would be excommunicated. They call it late sententia. You don't have to write you a letter. You have done it to yourself. You knew you were going to do it, and you're out. So people were waiting. The press was waiting to see what was going to happen next. And what happened to be the next thing that happened in our whole movement was that there was this ordination in Boston. So I thought I'd go up to Boston from New Jersey. I'd be ordained a deacon. I'd come back, and little by little things would get out, and people would understand what was going on. Well, that didn't happen because it was on the front page of my hometown newspaper the next day. So I had talked to, and I didn't want anybody to be surprised. I had talked to the pastor for whom I did RCIA. I told him what I was doing. He was very, very supportive. He said, now that you're saying this, I'm not surprised. Wow. He also said that he would continue to give me communion. I had withdrawn from both of the colleges in which I worked because I didn't want to have them in the crosshairs. I knew what was going to happen. I had also withdrawn from the retreat center. And so I thought, that there wouldn't be a lot of trouble. Well, that was wrong. The bishop from somewhere, he wasn't in the diocese at the time, called my pastor and said, no, you won't give her communion. So that didn't happen. Also, there was a notice in every bulletin, in every church in my county that decried the ordination of women and explained very clearly why women couldn't be ordained. There were news crews, of course, at the ordination. My most memorable impression of that ordination was the gratitude of the people as they were coming forward for communion, the tears and the smiles. And I couldn't get over it. One woman after the ordination ceremony came up to me and said, can I have your autograph? home priest. This wasn't there, it was someplace else. It was a retreat, a silent retreat that I was on. She said, can I touch you? But I mean, people are just so moved and so overwhelmed. It's just so interesting. In that way, it's wonderful. Okay. I'll tell you just a few awful things. What's the awfulest? Well, I don't have time to explain, I know. Anyway, I took to heart some quotes from Scripture. One was, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. And the other one was from Paul, nothing can separate you from the love of God. And there were others. And so I was very comforted by my friends. I lost a friend. Well, it wasn't a friend, was it? I had one woman say to me, because I was no longer able to receive communion, how does it feel not to receive Jesus? And I said, I walk with Jesus every day. And she said, yeah, but how does it feel to not really, receive him in the Eucharist? She didn't say this word. And I said, and I realize now, it was because I was ostracized. This is shunning. That was what was painful. I said, it's incredibly painful. And she said, oh, good. It took me a while to figure out where that was coming from because I think she was a good person. And I did figure it out, and I am at peace with it. I think she thought, well, you know how serious this is, and you really do respect the Eucharist, and maybe you'll come back, because that's what excommunication is supposed to do. It's supposed to help you to want to come back. Well, it doesn't work that way. So I have some other stories, but I think I can leave them there. I was ordained a priest in 2009. I now pastor a community, Sophia Inclusive Catholic Community. I've got 150 people on our email list. They don't want to be taken off, even though some of them can't come, because they want to know we're there, and they want to know what we're doing. We have about 40 people who come regularly. I have a satellite community now, about 45 minutes away. That's growing, and there's actually 2 women in that community who are on the path at various places for ordination. I've done weddings, I've done funerals, baptisms. Of course, my main ministry is to offer Eucharist, but we will offer Eucharist. And I think if I needed to put one word or one phrase on what my ministry is all about, is that it's a healing ministry, because it is addressing the pain that people have had who have walked away from the official church, but didn't want to walk away from Catholicism. So we are bringing them back. The official church would not give you that statement, but they feel that they're back, and I feel that they're back. I feel that we're back. So we're here, we're not going away, and I'll stop there. And I'd love to answer your questions.
Any questions?
I have one question. Could you please repeat your church or ministry? I keep hearing Sophia, but I don't hear her very well.
It's Sophia Inclusive Catholic Community.
My question is, going through theology school as a woman, and particularly with this in your background, whether you knew where you'd end up writing papers and basically still catering to what is the long-established understanding, imposed theology of the Bible, how does that affect how you work your papers?
Well, number one, I had gone through all Catholic schools and fought with them, of course, and gotten in such trouble. But I was in it was a women's college. It was St. Elizabeth's College in New Jersey, in Morristown. And the staff there was very progressive. And you heard it in what they didn't say more than in what they did. So they knew how to stay out of the spotlight, but they let us talk. So I didn't find condemnation at all, and I found it was very easy. I don't know if does that answer the question?
Yeah, I noticed that even in college, I'm an older student obviously, that having been in the world, I see how things actually operate, where you come to school and they want you to go, well, Bob Howard said, and this is his theory, and you will write a paper on Bob Howard's theory, and even though the whole time you're writing a paper, you're going, oh, that is like so wrong, because like 10 years years later, he was debunked, you know. So why are we still writing about these things that, while they're important to know, what are we actually being taught to think as opposed to regurgitating information?
Yeah, I hope you are being taught to think. I think I was taught to think. And we did reference, well, the theologians we referenced were Karl Rahner, that's Chabin, you know, the people who have the newer, the cosmic theology, the evolutionary theology, and nobody told us not to do that.
Is there another question?
I would just like to make a comment. I'm a United Methodist clergy retired, and I am so glad to see a Catholic priest, because I have had sisters well, clergy sisters, because we United Methodists have been ordaining people. Well, my great aunt was the circuit riding preacher in the town.
Wow.
So it's in the family, but I am so glad to see that the Catholics are, and some of you all are paving the way for those who will come after.
Exactly.
Which is the beginning. Thank you.
By the way, I am very, there is an Episcopal woman minister in my town, priest in my town, and there's a Methodist woman also, and Lutheran, and they're all very, very, very embracing. People ask, would we, you know, I say, well, I'm not going to see the church except when the priest. I don't expect to see that, period. Even Pope Francis has said no. But would I go back if Pope Francis said, oh yeah, we'll take with the priests? We are asked, would you go back? And I wouldn't be able to go back into that structure. And I think that that's the answer that you would hear from most of us, because our structure is circular. Our bishop has no more power than any of us, or influence. Our bishop is a bishop, and she fully understands this, to ordain. That is her ministry, along with her parish. But when it comes to questions, we talk about circles, we have circular discussion. But that's how we make our decisions, and that's true of the entire RCWP. Nobody speaks for us. Nobody makes decisions for us.
Another question?
We have, go ahead.
It's a question, it's sort of a cloak and dagger question. I'm trying to figure out what happened in 2002 on the river. The question is, can you trace your lineage? And what I'm wondering is,
Yeah.
I mean, were those three priests, did they have like black cloaks on, or?
Well, the priest, the bishop that ordained the first priest was legitimately a bishop, but he had already had his separation from Rome. So he was out in the open. There was no problem with him. The problem was when they went to ordain some of those priests bishops. Those bishops had to apply. So that was a private ceremony. That was not on the river. No. Yeah.
Did you ever consider seeking ordination in another denomination, say the Episcopal Church, or did you feel that you were called to remain in Catholicism?
And I hear other women say the same thing, and Catholicism is in our DNA, and we're raised with it. It's our home. It's our home, and many of us, a lot of us, have tried, to go into other traditions, and they don't fit as well. They don't fit as well. And yes, my daughter said to me, "Are you doing this just because they said you can't?"
Yes.
Knows me well. I really had to take that back to prayer, and part of my answer was yes. I am doing it to speak truth to power over something that I believe is wrong, but I am doing it also because I am called to ministry within my church. And something that I've always felt has been great pain when other people have been hurt by representatives of my church. How dare they? How dare they tell people they can't come forward for communion?
Can I have somewhat a related question, and I don't even know if it's a question, whatever. It's my understanding that so many of the sisters and nuns when I was a younger person in 40s, 50s, 60s, really were not prepared for the work that they did and do not have pensions or anything like that. So there's a situation where women in the church were just thrown out there, and I still don't know that we're able to care for them as well as we could, which makes me both sad and angry and a lot of feelings. Is there any of that that affects as well your conviction or the conviction of other women who want to take this, what I would call a positive step for women in the church?
Yes, absolutely. People don't understand that the sisters are not supported by their diocese. You know, the money that they raise, the land that they have, was not paid for by the diocese, and their retirements are not supported. Now there is once a year an initiative for women religious, but that's only 10, 12 years old. So they have to take care of themselves, and now they're an aging population because young women find other ways to serve. They don't necessarily go into formal religious orders. So yes, and I think a lot of the sisters, I think there are many of the sisters who are not formally ordained, but within their communities are the leaders of Eucharistic celebration, and they see their Eucharist as valid as anybody else's. And that's not generally known. To be investigated, you know.
One last question.
Somebody who hasn't had a chance, otherwise it would be bad.
I know we said earlier that you're already planting the seeds for more women to come on this, but collectively with the other women priests, are you doing anything specific to try to bring other women on the path to ordination, like recruiting in a way?
Our recruiting is simply letting people know that we're here, and then people can come and talk to us. Yeah, but we're not going out there saying, hey, come. Yeah, it's just, it seems like